And we are going. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Cool. Well, thanks for being on the show. Where are you at right now?
I'm in my office at near the Mob Museum in Las Vegas.
In Las Vegas. Cool. And is that where you grew up?
I've spent a lot of my life in Las Vegas, although I'm originally from Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but we moved out here when I was 11 years old, so I'm more of a Westerner, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, 11's pretty young to move out.
Hmm.
Wow, sweet. Right by the Mom Museum too. Yeah, I was in Vegas, what, like a week, 2 weeks ago now? We were
Hmm.
trying to check out the Mom Museum, but didn't have time. But it looks pretty sweet. It looks very fun.
It's a great place to work. We're in a historic building, and we just have a great topic, and every day we're delving into interesting stories. So it's a great place to work.
Yeah. So what's the building that you're in?
So the building is the first federal courthouse and post office in Las Vegas. It was built in 1933, which is pretty old by Las Vegas standards, kind of a young
Mm-hmm.
city. And so it's a classic modern, as they say, design. It looks like a building you would see in Washington, D.C. or what have you, and which is also unusual for Las Vegas. We have very few of those.
Mm-hmm.
And after in the 21st century, it was transformed into a museum. But for many years, it was the federal courthouse here.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah,
So you're kind of, I mean, would you call yourself a Las Vegas historian? Would that be a correct term for you?
yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
I really started as a Las Vegas historian before I became a mob historian. So uh, it's both, really.
Mm-hmm. But that story just kind of intermingled together.
Yeah, definitely there are a lot of connections between mob history and Las Vegas history. Las Vegas, and it could be argued, and often is argued, that the mob built Las Vegas,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a little bit more. It's a little more complicated than that, but generally speaking, when you look at the growth of the Las Vegas Strip, all the
Mm-hmm.
casinos along there, or the ones that used to be there, definitely the mob played a huge role in that. So yeah, there's a lot of intersection.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing is like I think well, for myself at least, and I'm sure a lot of people think this is, people you go out to visit Vegas and you're like, what the heck? Like, how did this place come to be? Just this huge metropolis destination in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
It's just like crazy. So that's what I'm curious about, and we're just hoping to learn on this, show is how Las Vegas got started and all this stuff. And you're the author of Sun, Sin, and Suburbia: The History of Modern Las Vegas. So you have some knowledge on the subject for sure.
I spent a little time thinking about this and researching it. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, let's just dig into it. Like, how did this all start? Where does the story begin?
Yeah. So I would say that the best way to describe the origins of Las Vegas is really in a couple of parts. So it started with the settlement here in 1855 of a group of Mormons. So remember, the Mormons had moved to Utah
Right.
territory
Mm-hmm.
in the late 1840s, and then they started looking at expanding around the West. And one of the places they wanted to settle was in this Las Vegas Valley. There were really no Anglo people here at the time. There were Paiute Indians, and that's about it. But there was a trail running through Las Vegas that connected Utah and California. And so one of the things that happened in Las Vegas is there were a lot of like bandits hanging out here. So if you had a wagon train coming between Utah and San Bernardino, California, Las Vegas is a place where you might have been a little concerned about your safety or the
Right.
well-being of your cargo. So
Mm-hmm.
the Mormons decided to set up in Las Vegas. They sent a group of people here, and they, settled. They built a fort. They started planting crops. Families, each family was had allotted a certain amount of acreage, and they built a little community here. They wanted to proselytize to the Paiutes because that was part of their mission.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem was Las Vegas was very inhospitable to this Mormon settlement. First of all, the Paiutes at the time didn't have the same kind of general mores as the Mormons did, and so
Uh-huh.
when you would grow something on your little plot of land, once it became ripe, it was free picking. So that was sort of the mindset. So
Oh,
I was
jeez.
like, hey, well, we'll take some of these radishes or whatever they are. Um, and Mormons didn't care for that.
Right.
The Paiutes were also not very receptive to the becoming Mormons. They weren't real excited about that idea. Meanwhile, there was a lot of dissension in the ranks of this group because, frankly, it was hot as hell here, and it was difficult to live in Las Vegas. And there was a leadership problem. People were rebelling against the leadership. They weren't agreeing with the direction where things were going. Uh, there was a mining operation. They set up a mining operation out in the hills outside Las Vegas, and they were mining lead. And this seemed like a good idea because they would use the lead for bullets and other things that they could use back in
Hmm.
Utah. The problem was the lead that they were mining wasn't good. It was, I guess, considered soft. It wouldn't harden into the way you think of a bullet certainly being.
Hmm.
So it was kind of a big waste of time.
Oh,
So
jeez.
long story short, the Mormons were only here for about 3 years and
Oh.
pulled up stakes and they went back to Utah. There are a bunch of factors that went into that, but the bottom line is they were the first settlers here, but they were only here very briefly.
Okay.
So after that, between 1858 and 1900, really, what you see is um, a relative handful of ranches in Las Vegas, mostly just serving people coming through, you know, and it was very small. There was some agriculture. There was a lot of um, uh, different things going on, raising herds of cattle and so forth, but it was really sleepy. There was not a lot of activity here.
Hmm.
Everything changed in 1902 when a woman named Helen Stewart, who had a big ranch here, sold her land to a railroad baron. And the railroad baron, William Andrews Clark, he decided he was building a railroad between Salt Lake City and Southern California.
Yeah. Okay.
And this would be really useful for a variety of reasons. And he needed a halfway point, a division point, where he could water his trains, where he could repair the trains, he could have his railroad workers stay. So he bought the land in Las Vegas. He created a town site, and he auctioned off lots in the town site. And in 1905, there was this big auction in May of 1905. It was like 110 degrees. It was an unusually hot May day.
Jeez.
People came out anyway. They came out on the train from LA, from Salt Lake, and they bid on these lots. And it turned out William Andrews Clark, the railroad baron and mining baron, also made a killing because he made much more money on these lots than he had paid for them collectively.
Huh.
So Las Vegas, really, its origins begin with a land auction, which isn't
Huh.
surprising. People started moving here, settling, but starting businesses. They started a bank. They started a store. Of course, they started saloons and bar saloons and gambling parlors and brothels and all kinds of things.
Hmm.
And Las Vegas became kind of a way station on the railroad, but also there were mining. There was a lot of mining going on up in central Nevada. There was Tonopah, there was Goldfield, there was Rhyolite, all these mining strikes, gold and silver. And then the whole point of the railroad was you would take this gold or silver ore, you would get it to Las Vegas, and then you get it on the train and take it to LA so that you can, have it, how you can sell it.
Right.
So you'd have the miners after months out in the desert, just, barely, keeping their sanity as they dig through these mines. They would come to Las Vegas for a few days and really blow off steam. And they would do that in obviously a variety of ways, drinking too much, going to the brothel, gambling, all of these things. And
Hmm.
Las Vegas soon kind of became that kind of a place. It was a place where, nowadays we call it a party town. I think back then, you might have another name for it, but it was a place where, people would have fun and take a break from their cares. So that
Right.
started very early.
Wow. Interesting. So what was the initial like how did this the railroad tycoon kind of bring in like how did he convince people to come and bid on this land?
Well, that's a good point. So, why would somebody want to do this? Well, the idea you could get in on the ground floor of a new community. I think that
Hmm.
was attractive to some people. For even though he made a lot of money on the land auction, these lots were not that expensive. It was probably much cheaper than what you could pay, what you would pay in LA. So
Right.
you want to get in on the ground floor of a new opportunity. You buy this land. You you put in your store or your bank or your saloon, and you've got a foundation for something you can build on. And so there were a lot of people who took advantage of that. And there are some of those families that are still with us today in the
Oh
community.
wow.
That's kind of amazing, right? The Cashman family, the Von Tobel family, the Beckley family, all these families, they were there at the beginning
Huh.
and they are still with us, and their descendants are still with us today. So, they became very wealthy, many of them, and because they were here, they were in on the beginning, they were in on opportunities that came up later, and took advantage of those, and kind of like, it was a smart move on their part. But
Yeah.
it was extremely rough in the beginning. I mean, keep in mind there was no electricity. The water was, there was no central water system or sewer system. No air conditioning in those early years. I mean, it had to have been tough, and it didn't really turn into anything resembling a town that you would recognize, I would say, until the 20s. And even after that, you didn't really have air conditioning in homes until the late 30s or the early 40s.
Right.
So people found innovative ways to keep cool, but it was different than it is today, where every building and every car, right, is climate controlled. So you in the middle of summer here, you're exposed to the heat very little, as little as possible.
Hmm.
That wasn't how it was back then.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a very attractive place to go. Like here, I live in LA, Long Beach, right by the beach, and
Uh,
the weather varies from mid 60s to mid 70s. That's it, like year round, So anytime I go to Vegas, it's either like blazing hot or pretty cold for me, you know.
Yeah, you got to find those sweet spots here, in the spring and the fall when it is really perfect. But yeah, people don't realize too many times that it gets very cold. It can get quite cold here in the winter, and
Hmm.
so like we have New Year's here, right?
Yeah.
And we have massive numbers of people coming here from Southern California for our New Year's celebrations. Many of whom forgot to bring a coat.
Right.
And it's like, really? It's going to be 37 tonight at midnight, so maybe
Yeah.
you should have thought of that. But it's still much more mild than back east, of course, or in the Midwest or what have you.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. So that's it kind of almost it started to get that like sort of Vegas reputation like really early from the beginning because like that wasn't for the time that wasn't very common to have a town like that. Was it kind of a destination to go, like it is today?
I think maybe not a destination at that point,
Okay.
but I will say that there was a huge turning point. So in 1931, three important things happened that really turned Las Vegas into what it is today.
Hmm.
Uh, the first one was that construction of Hoover Dam started. This was the Depression in the 1930s, and
Hmm.
people were looking for work. It was a desperate time in a lot of parts of the country. In Las Vegas, though, we had the beginnings of the construction of Hoover Dam, and Hoover Dam offered good pay. It hired a lot of people, thousands of guys. They came from all over the country. They descended on Las Vegas and started working on the dam. This was a huge economic boost to this area. And although the federal government didn't want its employees to live in Las Vegas because of all the vice activity here.
Hmm.
It's a little town outside of Las Vegas called Boulder City, and Boulder City, which still exists today, became the sort of company town for Hoover Dam, or
Oh.
was known then as Boulder Dam. Well, so but the federal government ran that town, and that meant no liquor, sold anywhere. It meant no gambling. It meant no, it even had a curfew. You had to be in bed like 9 or 10 o'clock, or else
Jeez.
you're in trouble. So, what did these
Yeah.
folks do who are working these 12-hour shifts at the dam in perilous conditions and hot and sweaty and dangerous? Of course, they would come to Las Vegas. And
Yeah.
Las Vegas would answer all of their desires, right? So that's what happened, and Las Vegas took advantage of that. The second thing that happened in 1931 was the passage of two laws by the state government, the state legislature. The first one legalized gambling of all kinds in Las Vegas. And the second thing that happened, the second law that was passed, made it much easier to get a divorce. You only needed to spend 6 weeks to get a divorce. You had to
Huh.
live in the community for 6 weeks, and you could get a divorce. At that time, in other states, it was quite difficult to get a divorce. You know, there were all these hoops you had to jump through, and the woman in particular had to make all these arguments as to why to justify the divorce and everything. Well, Nevada made that much easier, and so what you saw is the emergence of these casinos on Fremont Street, which is downtown Las Vegas. And
Hmm.
you saw the rise of that as a destination. Like if you want to gamble legally where you're not going to get busted, go to Las Vegas, go to Reno. If you want to get a divorce and you don't want to have any hassle, go to Las Vegas, spend 6 weeks there, and then you get your divorce. And everybody's so in the 1930s, Las Vegas had an economic boom from those three things, from Hoover Dam construction, legalization of gambling, and the 6 week divorce.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy. Uh, so gambling was legalized for the state of Nevada, correct?
hmm
But it still wasn't, like, was it legal in other states at the time, or
No,
are you?
no other
No.
states. No
Okay.
other states. I mean, now we'll say that there were certain states that would say, well, you can have a bingo game, or there were a few states where you might be able to have a couple of slot machines and a VFW lodge or something like that. But for
Hmm.
the most part, what they called wide open gambling was not permitted. Now, you did have illegal places around the country, and
Hmm.
that's where we got most of our people who ran our casinos, right? We'll get into it. But, you can legalize gambling in Nevada and say, oh, you can have all the casinos you want, but you need somebody who knows what they're doing to run them. Who knows
Right.
how to, if something's been illegal forever, who knows how to run those except the people who've been doing it illegally somewhere else? So
Yes.
Las Vegas became a destination for uh, men typically who had great experience with gambling, and so they came here to go legit.
I see. So
Yeah.
do you know what was the impotence that kind of caused that law to be passed to allow gambling and make divorce easy?
I think it was really, well, I know what it was. It was Nevada at that time had, up to that time, Nevada had depended largely on mining for its economy. You
Hmm.
remember going back, Virginia City, Mark Twain. This was the huge Comstock lode strike of 1859, and then you had other mining strikes around the state. Mining was the thing in Las Vegas and in the entire state. Um, it was the economy of the state, but it was a boom and bust kind of economy. So one place would sprout up for 6 months or a year, and then the gold would run out, and it was time to go somewhere else.
Right.
So what was happening in the 1920s is, excuse me, Nevada was running out of mines. Basically, the mines were playing out, as they say, and Nevada needed some new economic ideas. So two of them that they came up with at that time were gambling and easy divorce,
Oh,
and
okay.
also easy marriage. I should note as well. They made marriage quite easy as well.
Huh.
Uh, but those were it was an economic decision.
Wow. That is cool. Makes sense. I mean, it just makes total sense for them to figure out something like that to boost up, get some revenue going.
Yeah.
Cool. So that makes total sense why Vegas started to develop. So that was through the 30s. So they started. It initially began on Fremont Street. That was initially where
Yeah.
all the casinos and everything started to be built.
Yes, part of the original, what was part of the original, and still is part of the original town site. So remember, they had the land auction in 1905, and all those lots were sold. That's where Fremont Street. Fremont Street runs right through that old town site. And
Huh.
years at that time, going back, there were even houses on that street. There were little businesses and so forth. But
Hmm.
what you saw developing in the 1930s was a casino district, really, and Fremont Street became the place where those casinos developed, and it became known, by a variety of names. Glitter Gulch, you might have heard that phrase. This was the epicenter of Las Vegas tourism at that time.
Wow. Okay. So was it, do you think at this point it had sort of become a travel destination like it is now, where people go for, to get married and stuff like that, like you said, easier marriage?
Yeah, for sure. Two things I think led to that. So the gambling, for one thing. People were interested in gambling.
Uh-huh.
It's sort of a human trait that we like
Yeah.
to gamble for some reason.
Yes.
The second thing was people would come to this area to take a look at Hoover Dam. Hoover Dam became a tourist attraction. Even when it was under construction, people wanted to come and take a look at this great engineering wonder.
Hmm.
So you started seeing people make a vacation out of it. They would drive up from Southern California, typically, although not from elsewhere as well, but typically from Southern California. They
Hmm.
would get a look at Hoover Dam, and then they would need some place to stay and some place to have a good time. And so they'd end up in Las Vegas, and they'd gamble, and they'd go to the shows or whatever was going on. And Las Vegas started adding more and more features so they could accommodate these tourists.
Okay. Makes sense. So were these early casinos, were they similar to what they are now? Do they look similar and have the same types of games?
I think when you're looking at the casinos on Fremont Street in the 1930s, they look nothing like what you think of today. They were
Oh.
small. Typically, the bar would be in the front, and then the casino, if you will, would be in the back. There was not this idea that the casino was the main attraction. The bar or the restaurant or whatever you had would be the main attraction, and then and if you want to gamble, you might go through that door.
I
And
see.
we still had a lot of, I don't know, morals, or moralists who would say, well, the gambling is a sin, it's wrong, so let's keep that in the back at least. Now that started to change clearly in the 1940s in particular, but early on, these places were storefronts essentially,
Hmm.
and they were converted into casinos.
Right, I see. And so was there, because all these tourists and stuff were coming in, was there pretty much from the 30s and when these casinos started to be built, were there hotels being built there as well?
Yeah, yes. So you had two things happening. One is you had hotels being attached to these buildings on
Hmm.
Fremont Street. The other thing you had was as you saw all over the country, there were these motor motels, right?
Yeah.
So up and down the Fremont Street, and you still have some of these vintage signs today, but these little motels which were sprouted up, and they would have their neon sign, and then they'd have the bungalow type effect. You pull your car right up, and there's the swimming pool right there on the street for some reason, and then you would park and you'd go right directly into your motel room. So you saw a big rise in that development as well.
Hmm.
Now everything sort of changed, revolutionized again in the 1940s with the emergence of the World War II, really. And
Oh,
World
okay.
War II was a huge impetus for Las Vegas um, uh, for two reasons. One, the arrival here, the placement here of an Army air base, which is now Nellis Air Force Base. But at the time, it was an Army air base because the Air Force didn't exist yet. The
Hmm.
Air Force didn't come into being until like 1946. But in 1941, the federal government, the military, wanted to start testing, uh, uh, flight testing for bombers and other pilots. And so this wide open desert was a great place to do that. So they established an Army Air Base here. Thousands and thousands of young men and their families came to the valley. And there's a housing shortage. There's a great need for additional facilities to accommodate these people. And so Las Vegas grew dramatically because of the air base.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that happened was there was a magnesium mine up in central Nevada. And magnesium was a great product to be used in military weaponry. And
Oh,
they
okay.
needed this magnesium, but to have it up in this very rural part of central Nevada didn't do them much good. So what they would do is they would mine the magnesium up there, and then they would transport it by train or by car, by truck, down to Las Vegas. And then there was a magnesium plant, and they needed a lot of water. So they tapped into the Colorado River, brought that water into the plant so that they could process this magnesium and create, the material that was needed to make torpedoes, to make bombs, to make airplanes, all of the stuff they needed that magnesium was good for.
Oh,
This too attracted thousands and thousands of workers, and it's just a huge number of people in a very short period of time. So the 1940s became this huge growth period for Las Vegas on its own. Um, Coinciding with that, because this growth was happening, people around the country are going, maybe we need to invest some money in Las Vegas. So the first major investment that we're talking about really was the construction of the El Rancho Vegas Hotel. And
okay.
that happened in 1941. And it was a much closer to what the kind of hotels you see today. Much smaller, but it had a lot of the hallmarks of what you expect today. It was on what is now the Las Vegas Strip, and it was very kind of low slung. And unlike Fremont Street, where every building was like right next to each other, kind of very urban style,
Mm-hmm.
Rancho Vegas had a spread, so you could sign up to ride horses. There was a nice swimming pool. There was, all of these different amenities for you, trees and, open area where you could spend time, and then a casino, of course,
Yeah.
restaurant, and so forth. So the Rancho Vegas opens in 1941, and then in 1942, the Last Frontier opens. And these are the Last Frontier is even a little bigger than the El Rancho Vegas, has a few more amenities, and now you've got the makings of a new kind of resort destination here. Not just these little storefronts on Fremont Street. Now you've got these Palm Springs style resorts, where you can kind of spread your legs a little bit and relax and do different activities, not just gambling and eating. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, so this was the emergence of what later became known as the Las Vegas Strip.
Okay. Interesting. So they just went to the area where the strip was just because they wanted more space to build like sort of their all-inclusive type of resort thing.
It was outside the city limits, which was
Oh.
desirable because the taxes were lower and the
Uh-huh.
regulations were more lax. But it also was on the highway, what they at the time was known as the Los Angeles Highway, and
Mm-hmm.
the Los Angeles Highway is now the Las Vegas Strip. But at the time, that was so you would before you would even get to Fremont Street, you would see these resorts, and so they were that much closer, just a couple miles, but they were that much closer to LA, and
Right.
that was desirable.
Huh. Very cool.
Yeah.
Um, so it's kind of interesting how it's almost like the federal government with their different projects, building Hoover Dam and then having this Navy base or Air Force, what was it?
Essentially an Air Force base. Yeah.
Air Force base there, how they sort of created Vegas because they had these huge things drawing a lot of people there. And of course, these people wanted a place to go and hang out and relax and everything. So when that base came in, was there sort of a development more up to the suburbs of Vegas with more type of housing and typical neighborhoods?
Yeah, so exactly. You're right on track, by the way, by noting that the federal government has played a huge role in the rise of Las Vegas, and there's a couple more of those that we can talk about as we move forward.
Oh.
But Hoover Dam construction, and then the Army Air Base and the magnesium plant, that's all federal investment essentially in Las Vegas.
Hmm.
So you could argue that the federal government kind of invented Las Vegas, um, but there's even more afterward. As for development here, yes, the air base was northeast of Las Vegas. and it was a little ways out, as you might expect. So the housing kind of moved in that direction first. And so you saw somewhat more typical suburban neighborhood development moving east.
Mm-hmm.
So Vegas moved east first, and then it moved west, and then it moved, well, it moves east and then north and then west and then south. That's more inside, but yeah, so you start seeing regular, you see more homes, you see more sort of cracker box kind of homes, if you will, quickly
Mm-hmm.
built, so many of which still stand today. Many a hipster in Las Vegas wants one of those, and it's kind of where they want to live, and it's 1940s era homes, uh,
Uh,
but they're cool.
yeah.
Yeah, close to
Yeah.
downtown, close to the action.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So now that totally does make sense because I was always curious also about how the shift kind of from Fremont Street and kind of the original to Las Vegas Boulevard and where it is now. So that does make sense.
Now,
And then
I should note that Fremont Street continued to thrive at this
uh-huh.
point. It does run into some challenges later when the strip just becomes so big, it overwhelms Fremont Street. But really, in the 40s and 50s and even the 60s, Fremont Street was still holding its own. It was still doing fine as a gambling area. But the strip was starting to emerge.
I see. Okay. And was Fremont Street essentially the same thing, or did they try to, I mean, during the 40s, 50s, and 60s, were they essentially the same, or did they try to match?
They improved. They made enhancements. They built up instead of out. So you saw the every time they did an improvement, they built another tower, but they didn't have the space for to spread out. So you don't have some of those amenities that you would see on the strip, golf
Right.
courses and all these other things.
Yeah. So was that a typical? Do you know if that had been going on in other places like Palm Springs or other things where there were these huge resort type of things with all this, or was that kind of a new thing for Vegas?
No, I think we copied basically
Yeah.
other places. I think Palm Springs is a great example, not the only example, but I mean certainly the idea of a resort destination that has some spread to it, where there's a golf course, there's tennis courts, there's big old swimming pool. There's you can ride horses, all these different things. So we had some racetracks here at one time. We
Hmm.
had a dog track, we had a horse track, cars. We were always looking for that amenity that we can add, and that started very early on the strip. They were emulating what they were seeing elsewhere.
Right, I see. Just making it a complete kind of travel destination with
With
everything you could
gambling, that
possibly.
was the difference. We added the gambling.
Right, I see. So that was the unique selling proposition for Vegas, huh?
I think so, and also entertainment. Although other places, entertainers performed in many places. This little old town of Las Vegas, still kind of a small place in the 40s, was attracting the biggest acts in the country. All the great performers of that era were Las Vegas was a stop on their tour. So they
Huh.
were stopping at the El Rancho Vegas or the Last Frontier or the Flamingo, which we'll probably get to, and some of these other resorts, to the point where in the 1950s, Las Vegas was making the claim that it was the entertainment capital of the world. People would argue with that, but that's, we were doing pretty well in that area by then.
Right. So was it just were all these performers and entertainers stopping off just because they were able to sell a lot of tickets there, or was it because they themselves also like to stop in Vegas?
Oh, I think that they made good money.
Yeah.
Las Vegas would pay. They probably had to pay a little more to
Hmm.
bring people out to the desert, but they paid well, and the fans were very appreciative.
Wow, cool. So
Yeah,
even back then, people would still, even it was still kind of in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the desert, and people would still make the drive out.
yeah, yeah. It wasn't really until the 50s or really the early 60s that you saw a lot of air travel here.
Hmm. Right.
Till jet age, the 60s when people started coming here en masse by plane.
I see. Okay, so we're in the 40s, and these newer, hotels and resorts are being built along, what would be Las Vegas Boulevard. Did that just continue to grow, and more investors and builders came in and just kind of copied that model?
Yeah, so keep in mind, the El Rancho Vegas and the Last Frontier were built during World War II. Now, World War II, much like the Depression, there was a lot of demands on the country. I mean, you had all your men going overseas to fight, but you also were building all these weapons, and you were taking all these manufacturing plants and transforming them into military plants. And women are going out to work, Rosie the Riveter, and all that. And there were rules, like you can't use these materials to build a hotel. These need to go to the war effort, that kind of thing.
I see.
So the fact that the El Rancho Vegas and then the Last Frontier were built, and there was a gap between 1942 when the Last Frontier was built and the next big resort, which didn't open until the end of 1946. One of the reasons for that was the lack of materials and the lack of money that could be invested in that. The war was going on. It was the priority. Well, regardless, in 1945, a man named Billy Wilkerson, who was the founder and publisher of the Hollywood Reporter newspaper, he had taken a liking to Las Vegas. He was basically a problem gambler, a gambling addict, and he had a real problem, but because he lost, as gambling addicts tend to do. And I made a lot of money. He had some very famous restaurants and nightclubs in LA during the 30s and early 40s, and as well as owning the newspaper. And but he lost so much money at the tables. Well, he decided, what I want to do is I want to own the house, right? I want to own the casino, and that way, it's a way to make money rather than lose it. So he finds a piece of property outside of Las Vegas, so even closer to LA by a couple of miles. And he buys it, 33 acres. He buys that piece of property, and he decides to start to build a nice resort there. Now, the important thing about Wilkerson is when you look at the hotels, casinos on Fremont Street, and when you even at that time look at the El Rancho Vegas and the Last Frontier, they were known locally as what we called sawdust joints. They were very cowboy western themed, and weren't real fancy. They were kind of cheesy, kind of pedestrian, that kind of thing. What Billy Wilkerson wanted to do was class up the joint. He wanted to have a nice place that would attract the Hollywood crowd that he hobnobbed with every day in LA. Right. And so it's like, if we're going to do that, we need to build a European style, Monte Carlo style, elegant, beautiful place. So he comes up with the idea for the Flamingo Hotel. And the Flamingo is going to have carpet. It's going to have all the employees are going to be dressed nicely. You're going to be expected to dress up when you come. The restaurant's going to be top notch. The entertainment is going to be, the entertainment venue is going to be beautiful. The rooms are going to be nice. All that. Right. And he starts building the Flamingo. He has a budget of about 1.2 million for it, which is a lot of money then that day, 1945. Into early 1946. But again, to go back to it, he's a gambling addict. And so he's having trouble paying his bills to build this Flamingo. So he's going down the street to the El Rancho Vegas or the Last Frontier, and he's gambling, and he's losing thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that should be going into the Flamingo construction. Jeez. He needs investors. He needs people who will help bail him out and allow him to finish the Flamingo. He ends up turning to some guys who back east who had money to spend, but may not have been the most upstanding citizens in the world. And we're talking about Meyer Lansky. We're talking about Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. We're talking about Gus Greenbaum and Frank Costello and all these guys who were the mob kingpins of the East.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a more complexity to it than that because there's a lot of front men involved, and you don't when you look through the records, it's not completely clear that these guys were the real money behind this, but they were.
Mm-hmm.
So Wilkerson was willing to do this. He was prepared to go into partnership with the mob because he'd done those kinds of things in LA before when he needed to.
Oh.
But he was wary. He was a little nervous about it, but he figured he could make it work. So
Uh-huh.
he gets an infusion of money and resumes construction on the Flamingo. Well, okay, so you're those investors. Imagine you're Meyer Lansky, you're Frank Costello. You want to make sure that your investment is being handled properly.
Right.
So what do you need to do? You need to send an emissary, an assistant, somebody out to Las Vegas to monitor what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So Meyer Lansky basically taps his old friend Bugsy Siegel, who was at that time living in L.A., handling the criminal rackets in L.A. He says, Bugsy, why don't you go? He wouldn't say that. Ben, go out to Las Vegas and keep an eye on what's going on at the Flamingo. Well, initially, Ben Siegel didn't have much interest in Las Vegas. He was interested in Hollywood. He, at one point, had done a screen test. He wanted maybe to go into the movies. He loved going to the Hollywood parties. He loved the women, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Meyer sends him out to Las Vegas. At first, he's not that thrilled with the whole idea. But over time, Bugsy takes a liking to this project. And he starts thinking, you know what? This thing could be really successful. I really want to control what's going on here at the Flamingo. So even though he and Billy Wilkerson are supposed to be working side by side to make sure this thing is successful, Bugsy becomes increasingly jealous of Wilkerson's control over what's going on, to the point where ultimately Bugsy starts making decisions on the construction site unilaterally and is pissing each other off. Well, Wilkerson complains about this, but we're talking with mobsters here. We know, he had to have known at that very moment that Bugsy had been involved in killing people in the past, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a little nervous. Well, ultimately, Bugsy decides he wants to take full control of the Flamingo. He wants Wilkerson out. He threatens Wilkerson's life to the extent that Wilkerson flees to Paris and lives in Paris during much of the construction of the Flamingo, and Siegel ultimately takes over.
Wow.
So when you think about the movie Bugsy, and you think about the sort of mainstream story of the Flamingo, you'll hear only about Bugsy Siegel. You don't hear about Billy Wilkerson because this whole mythology has been built around Bugsy Siegel invented Las Vegas. Well, not only did Bugsy Siegel not invent Las Vegas, he didn't even invent the Flamingo. I mean, he just muscled his way into it, and then he proceeded to spend a lot more money than Wilkerson wanted to spend. So Wilkerson had a budget of about 1.2 million. Siegel starts spending money like it's water, and he and his girlfriend Virginia Hill are involved in all kinds of renovations, all kinds of changes they want to make to the Flamingo to make it even better. Nothing wrong with making it better and nicer, but this is right after the war. There's a shortage of materials, and he's insisting on the finest marble from Italy, and he wants. This is a bizarre one. He wanted every hotel room to have its own plumbing system, sewer system, so it wouldn't be connected to the other ones. I'm not sure why he cared about that, but he did. Yeah, I wanted dependability, I guess. Extraordinarily expensive.
Yeah.
In the end, Bugsy spends about $6 million to open the Flamingo Hotel, to complete the Flamingo. Way over budget.
Yeah.
And really testing the patience of his own partners, his own mob partners. Well, so Bugsy's under pressure. He needs to start deriving some revenue from this project. See, he opens the Flamingo on December 26, 1946, the day after Christmas, and he's not really ready to open, but he feels he needs to open to start making money.
Mm-hmm.
The hotel rooms are not done at this time. They're still not done. So he has a casino and a restaurant and a bar and a lounge. He doesn't have any hotel rooms. So he opens the hotel, I mean, he opens the casino, and then when the night is over, what happens? All his guests get in a car and they go down to the El Rancho Vegas or the Last Frontier or downtown to stay overnight. And he's
Right.
lost, right? They can go gamble all night in the El Rancho Vegas if they want. They can get up early in the morning and start pulling slot machine handles. So the Flamingo struggles at first. The first couple of months, it's kind of a disaster.
Hmm.
There's a lot of different reasons why that happened. It wasn't only because of the lack of hotel rooms, but Bugsy's dream was not panning out. He ends up closing the Flamingo after the first of the year. Like I think it was February 1st of 1947, and then so that he can finish the hotel rooms and then reopen. So he does that. He finishes the hotel rooms, then he reopens about a month and a half later, and lo and behold, the Flamingo starts doing better. It's a
Hmm.
beautiful resort. People are starting to check in. They're sticking around. The numbers are looking good, and Bugsy's starting to feel better. Um, he's not necessarily paying off all his debts. He's not necessarily made all his bosses happy yet because it's pretty premature for that. But he's doing much better with it.
Hmm.
Well, in June of 1947, Siegel travels to California, to Beverly Hills. Virginia Hill, his girlfriend, has a home she rents there in Beverly Hills. And he sits down and have dinner. Virginia Hill's not there, by the way. She's left town. But he and his friends uh, come back to the house after dinner about 10:30 at night. He's sitting on the couch reading the newspaper, and a gunman, an assassin, shoots Siegel through the window of the home and shoots him right in the eyeball, hits him twice in the face, and then there's 7 other shots that were not as
Oh,
close.
oh my gosh.
He's murdered. He's dead.
Yeah.
That crime has never been solved. There
Woo.
are about 6 credible theories as to who was behind the murder. Um, we don't know for sure who it was, but the leading speculation, the leading belief is that the mob killed him. In other words, they were tired of Bugsy Siegel in Las Vegas. They thought the Flamingo could be a great success, but it would be even more successful without him causing
Hmm.
trouble. So they killed him. They had him killed. Um, One little piece of evidence that suggests this is that reportedly 20 minutes after Siegel was murdered in Beverly Hills, Gus Greenbaum and Mo Sedway, two of the guys who were partners in the Flamingo with Bugsy and with Beverly Wilkerson originally, walk into the casino. They say, Ben Siegel is dead. We're in charge. 20 minutes after the murder. Now, there's
Right.
no cell phones then. There's no texting. There's no Instagram to let people know what's going on. You got to be a phone call, and somebody had to know to call somebody that knew that this had happened right away.
Yeah.
Suggests that there was some orchestration to his murder and that the mob was involved. There could be other reasons, but that seems to be why.
Wow.
Well, it turns out the Flamingo, under the direction of Gus Greenbaum and Mo Sedway, is extraordinarily successful. Very iconic resort, did very well, and that hotel title is still on the Strip today, although Bugsy's original building is no longer there.
Oh, okay.
They replaced it.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that's how the 1940s developed. Now you have the Flamingo opening, and it's successful, and then you have one more that opens in the 40s, and then in the 50s you have this massive construction of casinos on the Las Vegas Strip, and
Hmm.
we're going great gangbusters in the 50s with gambling, and it starts looking a lot more like the place you see today. You have the
Right.
opening of Sands Hotel, you have the opening of the Sahara, you have the opening of the Hacienda and the Riviera, and then you have the Tropicana, the Dunes, the Stardust. All of these casinos start opening on the Strip, and it starts being called the Strip, and it has this. It really becomes a resort, on a much larger resort for people to come from really all over the world to see. It's a great wonder, like all this neon, all this gambling, all these entertainers. It's amazing. You know,
Yeah.
see Liberace one night, and then you can see Frank Sinatra the next night. There's like really big names on the marquees here.
Wow. So yeah, it really just started to snowball and perpetuate and just get into what it is today.
Yeah.
So one quick question about I guess the theories on why they would want Bugsy out of the Flamingo, because you said at that point it had started to do well, like it wasn't, it was just kind of initially improving and stuff. Did they just think that, without him entirely and without his like crazy spending, it would just be managed better and would do even better?
Number one, yes.
Uh-huh.
Before he really took control of the Flamingo. Siegel had zero experience running a casino or a hotel. He knew
Hmm.
nothing about it, nothing. Um, and when he did take over, he was extremely arrogant. He was defiant of his colleagues, his mob colleagues. He was very abusive toward his girlfriend, Virginia Hill, physically abusive.
Hmm.
Uh, People didn't like any of those things about him. And even though, a guy like Meyer Lansky went back with him as far as when they were teenagers on the streets of New York, um,
Yeah.
there's only so much you can take. So that's the leading theory, but it's not the only theory, because another leading theory is that his abusiveness toward Virginia Hill prompted someone who was concerned about her to order a hit on Siegel. So it was strictly
Oh.
about Virginia Hill. A third theory is that in addition to Siegel annoying his partners, he was also skimming. He was skimming money, and that's why Virginia Hill was going to Europe, because she was taking all the skimmed cash and hiding it.
Right.
I don't think that's true. I don't think there was any money to skim. It wasn't exactly hugely successful at that time.
Okay.
A fourth theory is that Siegel, his criminal rackets in both in Las Vegas, besides the Flamingo, other stuff that he was doing besides the Flamingo, um, was he was making enemies, and one of those things was the race wire. At that time, there was this whole phone network set up by the mob to get the horse racing scores and other sports scores into, you didn't have the internet with this instantaneous knowledge, right? So you had to call on the phone and say, this horse won this race, etc. And it was all part of their bookmaking operations. And he ran that in Los Angeles and in Las Vegas and elsewhere. And he made some enemies doing that because it was very competitive.
Hmm.
And he may have been killed by his rivals in that area. So there's different theories.
Right. Wow. Interesting. Very, very interesting.
Hmm.
What was the name of the guy who had started the Flamingo again?
His name was Billy Wilkerson.
Billy Wilkerson. Did he ever come back and into it?
He never came back to the Flamingo.
Oh.
He was out of the Flamingo. He did try another. He did make a short effort to come back to Las Vegas. In about 1950, he opened a little place in Las Vegas, but it didn't last very long. And by the 50s, Billy Wilkerson's health was really bad, and he
Hmm.
pulled back from his different investments.
Okay.
But he ended up dying in 1962, and his son William Wilkerson has written a very nice bio about his father, and just came out last year. And he
Okay.
talks about that and how, the Flamingo could have been his baby. It could have been an amazing thing for Wilkerson. It wasn't, and then this latter foray into Las Vegas was pretty half-hearted, so it didn't really
Hmm.
work.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's nice to know the original stories like that where, because that's the story I had always heard was that Bugsy was the one who kind of started everything, which,
Right.
I think is what spread. But yeah, it's
There's
nice to
even a
hear.
story. There's even a story you will hear frequently that Bugsy Siegel named the Flamingo after his girlfriend Virginia Hill, as if he nicknamed her a flamingo because she had very long legs, like a
Oh,
flamingo. It's total nonsense. There's no truth
right.
to it. That it was named the Flamingo before Bugsy even had ever heard of the project.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it makes you almost feel bad for Billy to, to kind of lose this project, but he really did it to himself with his gambling
that's
issues.
the
So,
thing. It's a
yeah.
real mixed story.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, I'm glad the real story's out, and his son wrote that book too. So very cool. And that I love how that's in the 50s. These casinos are starting to be built that are the same ones that are there today, and this all these names are names that we've all heard. It's very cool.
And so, of course, so many of those have been torn down now,
Yes.
or they've had their names changed. So, for example, the Sahara is still on the Strip, the Sahara Hotel, but now it's called the SLS. So
Oh.
the company came in, and now the Sahara is called the SLS. There's a rumor, by the way, that they may change it back to the Sahara. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But another example is the Sands Hotel, which also opened in 1952. It was torn down. Famously, the image of its implosion is in the movie Mars Attacks.
Oh.
Ever seen Mars Attacks? The
Mm-hmm.
sands comes tumbling down. I think, or is that the Landmark? I don't want to be. I want to overstate that. It might be the Landmark that's torn down in Mars Attacks. I might pull that back. But the Sands was imploded, and now that is the site of the Venetian and the Palazzo hotels on the Strip. The Riviera was torn down recently. That's going to become part of the Las Vegas Convention Center. The Dunes was torn down. That became the Mirage Hotel. Yeah, the Silver Slipper and the Castaways became the Silver Slipper became part of the Mirage as well. Castaways became part. Well, the start. I'm jumping around, but I mean, you can just give me an idea. It's very complicated. Where what is underneath each current casino is kind of a fascinating kind of a story.
Yeah.
Because you'd have an implosion, and then you'd have the new one rise up. And implosions became a tourist attraction in themselves in the 90s. When people would come, they would hear, okay, the implosion's on April 25th. We all got to go out to Vegas and see the implosion, and because these are these pretty fascinating, exciting things that happen, and this building just suddenly crumbles to the ground.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were recorded, and they were on the news, and people made a big deal out of it.
Yeah, I
But
can imagine.
some of the names are still standing. The Tropicana still stands on the Strip, still there. Some of the original building from 1957 is still there. As I mentioned, the Flamingo is still there, although the original building is not.
Mm-hmm.
Sahara is still there. Now it's been renamed the SLS.
Mm-hmm.
But many of the others have been torn down.
Yeah. That's cool that a few of them are still there where you can still kind of see the original architecture and the actual building. That's pretty cool that you can visit that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So was that just kind of the, after the 50s, was that just kind of the way of Vegas? Was it just kept growing and building and then eventually demolishing and building bigger stuff?
Pretty much. The 60s were a time where there was kind of a recalibration. There were not a lot of new casinos that opened in the 60s, with the exception of three big ones over the entire decade. You had the opening of the Caesars Palace, which is a big one.
Yeah.
And it really, the Caesars Palace opened the door for the themed resort. The idea that everything in the place has to have a theme, right? To follow the theme.
Mm-hmm.
Caesars Palace had this sort of Roman theme, right? Ancient Rome. So everything at Caesars was tied to that. Yeah. And then in the year after, you had the opening of the Aladdin Hotel, and the Aladdin had that kind of a theme.
Right.
And then you had in '68 the opening of Circus Circus, and Circus Circus had this circus clown theme, kind of crazy theme. And so you saw this whole theming process continue well into the 90s. We've kind of been getting away from it lately, but those themed resorts, many of them still stand. Caesar's Palace and Circus Circus among them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have noticed that it seems as though the newer things are not all centered around a theme again.
They're trying to get a little classier, a little less cheesy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So, so what has happened to? Because Fremont Street started. When did Fremont Street it went through kind of a decline, didn't it?
Yeah. So Fremont Street started feeling the pressure in the 70s, and especially in the 80s. where, it was seeing that its revenue was declining while the Strip was going up. And so Fremont Street casinos and the city of Las Vegas kind of recognized this problem in the mid to late 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and they decided they have to do something about it. And the solution ultimately was, if you haven't been to Fremont Street, or if you have, you probably know that there's a big canopy over Fremont Street from Main Street to 4th Street, and it's called the Fremont Street Experience, and it's a pedestrian space now.
Right.
It used to be when I was young. I'm old enough to have driven as a teenager, driven my car on Fremont Street and parked in front of a hotel.
Uh-huh.
But you can't do that today. It's all pedestrian promenade there now. And
Yeah.
there's this overhead canopy that has thousands and thousands and thousands of lights. And at night, every hour on the hour or whatever, there is a huge broadcast on these lights of some kind of what I would call like a music video, basically a long music video, and you'll see everything from planes flying really fast from one end of the canopy to the other. You'll see rock bands singing. You'll see, different faces popping up, different kinds of graphic schemes. I've never been a big fan, but a lot of people love it, and it's just definitely a spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in fact, the Fremont Street Experience and the canopy did reignite downtown Las Vegas. It really did help Fremont Street, and the casinos all started working together on that and on other things, to the point where they started making Fremont Street a little more cohesive, a little bit more teamwork oriented, to build their customer base, and they've been quite successful. Now,
Nice.
the numbers are, the Strip's numbers dwarf downtown's.
Mm-hmm.
That's always going to be the case. But downtown is definitely got its niche now. It's more affordable. It definitely attracts certain demographic groups. There are casinos downtown that target Hawaiians specifically. The Hawaiian community loves to come to downtown Las Vegas, and there's a couple of the places, the California Hotel, the Main Street Station Hotel, and a couple others, they cater to Hawaiians to the extent that the menus in the restaurants have Hawaiian dishes, and the music, the performers in the showrooms are Hawaiian performers, and all so forth. So that's an example of where downtown is kind of cornered the market.
Nice. That's good that they found their niche and have been able to hone in on that and capitalize on that. So that's good to hear. So when was that the Fremont Street Experience constructed?
That opened in, I believe, 1995.
Oh wow.
So it's been around a while, and it's gone through some incarnations. They've gotten better light bulbs, and switched to LED, and there's actually another iteration of the canopy coming soon. The casinos recently agreed to invest, I forget, several $1 million in another renovation. So they're constantly looking for ways to reinvigorate Fremont Street. One of the things they do is probably 9 months a year, live music is very prevalent at night on Fremont Street, and every dinosaur rock band known to man plays down there. And sometimes it's quite fun, but sometimes it's a little much. But they're just a couple of blocks away from the Mob Museum, so 7 or 8 o'clock at night on a Friday night, that music is booming, and people are crowding in there by the thousands. So Fremont Street does pretty well. Nice.
Yeah, it's definitely it is very different than being on the Strip, where you can easily walk between the different hotels and everything, and it's all kind of there. It's not as engrossing, I guess, as huge resorts. But yeah. Cool. So what do you think is kind of the future of Vegas? What's happening? What's on the horizon? What do you think is gonna happen?
Well, so I think it's interesting to look at it a little bit more globally, if you will, not just the casinos, but looking at Las Vegas as a place that attracts tourists for a lot of reasons. One of the things we've seen over the past 10 years in Las Vegas is that tourists are not spending as much of their money on gambling anymore. They're coming here for the restaurants, and we have a lot of celebrity chefs here with their premier restaurants here.
Hmm.
Um, we have a lot of shopping, tons of shopping opportunities here now. So people come here to shop. We have, still amazing entertainment venues. We have Cirque du Soleil, which has about 8 shows up and down the strip that you
Yeah.
can take in. Um, all comedians and magicians, and everybody's here. So people are spending a lot of money on those things. They're going to day spas. They're engaging in all kinds of different activities, and gambling is just a piece of the puzzle now.
Hmm.
So we're looking at that trend and making sure that people keep spending money, even if they're not spending it all on gambling. The second thing we're seeing is that Las Vegas is really focusing on special events. So country music awards, some kind of a music festival, some kind of a convention that attracts huge numbers of people, like CES,
Hmm.
or those kinds of things. Las Vegas race. We have auto racing, right? So we have NASCAR. We have 2 NASCAR races per year here. That
Oh,
draws a lot of people. We have the National Finals Rodeo here every year. Attracts tens of thousands of people. Um, we have the music awards I mentioned. We have uh, beauty pageants. We have, it's just you name it. Las Vegas is looking for a reason for it to come here. The third thing is professional sports. And you've
yes.
no doubt heard that we have a hockey team now, a
Yes.
professional NHL hockey team called the Vegas Golden Knights. And last year, in their first season, they play right on the Strip. They play in the T-Mobile Arena, which is right on the Las Vegas Strip, right next, it's wedged between 2 casinos.
Right. Yeah.
And the Golden Knights play there. They played their first season last year. They ended up going to the NHL Finals. The final, they lost, but they went all the way to the finals in their first year. Very strange, but people locally and tourists love going to these games. They've sold out every game they've ever played.
Whoa.
So yeah, so Vegas has embraced hockey, and that has drawn a lot of activity here. Now, guess who's coming next? Pro football.
Yeah.
So you have the Oakland Raiders moving here in 2020 from Oakland. We're building an arena for that, or a stadium for them, right on the Strip.
Hmm.
Uh, Actually, it's not true. It's 1 block off the Strip.
Yeah.
We're building a giant stadium for professional football. So one of the things that happens when you build this arena for the Vegas Golden Knights, when they're not playing, you can put concerts in there. We've had huge concert schedule in the T-Mobile Arena, 18,000 seats, and then you're going to have a football stadium where you could have epic music festivals, or like the biggest bands in the world performing. Uh, right there in the stadium, or you could have more mundane things, whatever you want to do, and you have all this space. You could, the latest talk is that the Super Bowl, we're going to be probably have the Super Bowl here in 2025. Now that's a few
Nice.
years off, but the Super Bowl in Las Vegas in 2025. Get ready
Yeah.
for it. So these are the things that Las Vegas is looking at now. It's not just about gambling anymore. It's about all these other attractions that we can create.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you guys are able to kind of make a good pitch to like a huge convention or conference or something or sporting event because you have the hotels and infrastructure to support
Yeah,
a whole bunch of people like that.
we have the facilities to do just about anything.
Yeah. Very,
Yeah,
very cool. Wow. Awesome. Well,
yeah,
this was great. I had heard bits and parts of that story, but I had never heard the whole Vegas, origin story like that. So that was really, really fascinating to hear that. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Oh, it was fun to talk to you. I enjoyed it.
Cool. So I guess where can people find you or find your book or get more info on all this stuff?
Sure. So the first thing I'd like to mention is the Mob Museum where I work. The museum has a great deal. A lot of this history I talked about today is in the museum,
Mhm.
and it's really a good place to learn about Las Vegas history and organized crime history in general. As far as my Sunset in Suburbia book, it's available on Amazon. It's available in this Museum bookstore,
Nice.
and it's generally pretty easy to find.
Cool.
I'm now working on a revised edition of my biography of Howard Hughes, and we didn't even talk about him. Maybe we can do that another time. But
Yeah.
Howard Hughes has had a big influence on Las Vegas, and so I've had a book on that published in 2008. Currently out of print, but it's coming back. I've done a revised edition, and that'll be coming out in probably within a year.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Let's do an episode on that. That'll be fun
Okay.
because every time I take my dog for a walk every morning here in Long Beach and we see the big,
There you
dome
go.
where the spruce
Yeah.
goose was. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
That'd be fun. Awesome. And then, okay, I had one last question I wanted to ask you. Do you know where the name Las Vegas came from?
Yeah. Las Vegas is Spanish for the Meadows. And the
Oh, okay.
reason this was known as the Meadows is pretty basic. The desert, this is the Mojave Desert. It's the driest desert in North America, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, but at that time, in the 1850s, when Las Vegas got its name, this was a very lush kind of a place. We had all these springs bubbling up all over the Las Vegas Valley, and we had all this greenery everywhere, natural. And so it was a place where it was a destination for Indians and other traders, fur trappers, everybody like that, because there was water here, and you could water your horses. There were these pools here. Springs would bubble up, and it created these pools, what was known as the Las Vegas Spring, and the people would come from hundreds of miles of dry desert, and they'd suddenly show up in Vegas, and they'd be refreshed. So the
Mm-hmm.
Meadows, that's where that comes from.
Oh, okay. Makes
Yeah.
sense. Cool. Man, yeah, it's crazy the amount of knowledge that you have. You have really studied this stuff and you just have it right there. It's
Out
really
of my
fun.
life, living in the past. Yeah.
Yes, well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing. Thanks for being on, Geoff. Have a good rest of the day. Appreciate it.
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Well, of course.